All right. Well, good evening, everyone. As we're going to let people log on, we'll give it a minute here. You're here with the Clovis Unified Family Resource Center, and we're going to discuss special education tonight. So we're glad you could be here with us. I always say, Ginger, I wish I had like some music to play. I don't know. I haven't quite found that feature in Zoom yet.
That's above my pay grade right there.
Right? I watched a lot of how-tos, but I haven't figured out that feature yet, but that's okay. Well, all right, it's 6:31, so we'll go ahead and get started. Ginger, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, and while you're doing that, I'm gonna launch a poll to
Okay.
see who we have here with us tonight, okay?
All right.
All right.
So hello, everybody. My name is Ginger Cook, and I am one of the lead psychologists in Clovis Unified. And I love doing these trainings with Leanne, and I wish I could see everybody, but I know we can't. But yeah, as we are going through the presentation and talking about SPED, please, Leanne, are they going to ask questions in the chat? Is that how they do that?
They can. I'm going to do housekeeping in just a minute.
Okay.
And so, yep, they can ask questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll
Okay.
monitor it.
So, yeah, I've been a school psychologist for over 20 years now, and support all of our school psychologists in our district and our behavior team. So just looking forward to tonight.
Yay, okay. Well, and we are grateful to have you here, Ginger. You've got quite a job title and task that you take on every day, and we appreciate how you serve our district.
Thank you.
So I am Leanne Gajarian Keeler, and I'm the coordinator of the Family Resource Center. This is just a little bit of information for those of you that are familiar with the FRC. So I serve families who have children ages birth to 22 throughout Clovis Unified who have special needs. I say birth because birth to 3 is early intervention, and I'm housed with our early start team and our preschool assessment team, but then I continue to serve families all throughout special education, all throughout our district. This is my contact information. This is also social media and how you can stay connected with the Family Resource Center. You can be one of my 300 followers. I know, right? Woo! But I really do try and share out resources on there. So you are welcome to check that out. All right, a little bit of housekeeping. So as Ginger just mentioned, on the bottom of your toolbar, on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a question and answer button. We're going to use that to ask questions as we go along because it helps us keep track of it, okay? Um, Closed captioning, if you need that, that also is available on the bottom. The chat feature, we're going to just use that for us to share out if a resource or a link, something like that. And then there should be a react button along the bottom of the screen too. You can hear, I'll show you an example. There you go. You can react to things that you like or maybe don't like. Hopefully we don't get dislikes, but you can do what you want, right?
Right.
We'll still like you. We are in webinar format, and again, that is because it keeps the distractions at a limit, and also for privacy, just keep it simple. So next, we have more housekeeping. This is being recorded, and in fact, let me confirm that. Well, do you see the record button on, Ginger?
Well, I heard it. It said
You
this
heard
was
it.
being recorded earlier.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And so you will have access to this recording within the next couple days. I'll be sending out an email. It's going to include a link to the handouts. handouts. That's meaning this PowerPoint, the resources from tonight, a certificate of attendance. It'll also have the link to the recording of tonight's presentation. There will be a link to a survey that will pop up at the end of this presentation, like when you log off. Please take a moment. It is just 5 questions, and your input really does matter, and it really does help drive these presentations. So just take a moment. And disclaimer, this presentation is for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. So, all right, I'm going to start off with a special education overview. So what is special education? Again, this is Special Education 101, right? So let's just talk a little bit about what it is. It is specifically designed instruction at no cost to parents, designed to meet the unique needs of a child with disabilities. Now, again, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, and that's for children that meet those qualifications. Special education programs, they're regulated both by federal law and state law. But as we go through the presentation tonight, you're going to see these little red pins, and I did that on purpose because again, as a parent myself, right, I need little visuals like, just get to the point, Leanne. What do I need to remember? Okay. Like, just give me the meat and potatoes of it. And so I wanted to give you little visuals of things to remember. So special education is a service, it's not a place. All right. Special education services can look very different for every child. Again, because their unique needs, right? So every child is different, all their services are different. So one of the really common questions I'm sure Ginger gets as well, right, is what's the difference between an IEP and a Section 504 plan? So they both serve children with disabilities, right? But in general, children whose disabilities don't interfere with their ability to progress in general education, okay? So you're looking at a 504 plan to make accommodations. So whereas with special education, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but you know, it can include accommodations as well, but it can also include modifications. 504 plans do not modify the curriculum. And so I put a little QR code. Each year, our Clovis Unified 504 plan coordinator for the whole district, she does a 504 plan webinar with me, and that is recorded. And I put a link on there. If you, in your free time, you know, want to peruse and get a little more understanding specifically to 504 plans. But tonight we're talking about IEPs and special education. So again, accommodations are designed to provide a student with equal access and don't fundamentally alter the standards or the expectations. Modifications, and it's very easy to get these mixed up, but modifications are designed to provide a student with meaningful access, and they can fundamentally alter the standards or expectations. For instance, they could take a kiddo off diploma track, right? And they're on certificate track. So, as I mentioned before, in general, 504 plans, you know, don't provide modifications. IEP plans can provide both. All right, so special education services. In California, you heard me mention in the beginning that I serve children birth to 22. This is why. So birth to 3, as I mentioned, that is Part C. That is early start services. That is a whole nother webinar, but in general, kiddos who are getting early start services, that is through the regional center system here in California. Though that is an IFSP, and that is Part C services. Then once the kiddo is 3 to 21, you know, they may be eligible for special education, and those are called Part B services. 18 to 22, that is, you might have heard the term ATP, Adult Transition Program. That's students that did not receive, they had an IEP at the end of high school, but they did not receive their diploma. And so those services for for those students, they could be eligible for extended services up until age 22. All right, so just a little, nerdy fact stuff, but the history of IDEA. Fun fact, this year we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the implementation of IDEA. It's been a big deal around the country. People have been doing all kinds of posts and making videos. Services, well, there weren't those special education services for students with special needs before that were designed under this law. So 1975 is when IDEA was signed. 2004, there were some revisions made. And currently, there are almost 7 million children in the US that have an IEP, and in California alone, almost 400,000. And in Clovis Unified, we have approximately 5,500. So it's definitely, a large population. This is just, again, I love my little summaries, right, for families because I appreciate them. These are just a few key points of IDEA. Is you might hear the term FAPE. That's a free and appropriate public education to children with disabilities, and it guarantees children, again, that qualify, that have the special needs, an appropriate assessment by trained specialists, and an individualized education program based on their needs. You might hear the term, if you've been to an IEP, you're going to hear, oh, mom, dad, here's a copy of your procedural safeguards, right? That's your parent rights. And so it's required that every meeting that, well, and other times as well, but that you're given that a copy of that. You don't have to take it. You can say, no, thank you. I've got 14 copies next to, my filing cabinet now, but they do have to offer them to you. The important thing to remember about that is in those procedural safeguards is the due process procedures. That's the outline that tells you how to resolve differences that you might be having with your school district. Another component is that IDEA says that for kiddos that are, that qualify, that the school district's going to provide that IEP, individualized education program, and that's written by a team that important includes parents, their representatives, all the team members, and an administrator. And lastly, that children receive their education in the least restrictive environment. And again, we're going to go over all these terms more. Please don't feel like you have to memorize them. But fun fact, there will be a test in a little while. But so LRE, you might hear that term thrown out. It means least restrictive environment. And again, we can talk more about that in a little bit. So this is called the FAPE continuum. And this is just a little visual because again, at meetings, you hear these terms, these acronyms all thrown out. I was in IEP earlier today and somebody mentioned, LRE and a possible, program change and the poor parents are like, well, what's an LRE? And so the team, graciously, as they should, right, slowed down and were like, oh, sorry, and explained what that meant. But so this is the FAPE continuum, the free and appropriate public education continuum. This is talking about, and Ginger, feel free to jump in as the school psychologist, but right, you're talking evaluation, and then so you're determining eligibility, right? Present levels and areas of need, that's all the assessment. And then once they're determined eligible, then you're developing the actual IEP. Measurable goals, services that are in the least restrictive environment, and making sure that the student is getting educational benefit. Anything you want to add to that, Ginger?
Nope, I think you summarized it. That's good.
Okay. All right. So now I'm turning it over to Ginger because this is all your bread and butter.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is assessments that you as a parent are going to get from our school district from different types of assessors, and how that answers the question of eligibility for special education. So for our kiddos who are ages 3 and up, as Leanne just went over, once a student hits 3, we have to determine, are they eligible for special education services? Because before that, they were getting services under a different category. It's different funding, is that correct, Leanne? Different funding source, those types of things. So, so it all starts with the referral, right? That's where the story starts. Actually, the story started way before that, but the story for the IEP starts with the referral. So, you as a parent can make that referral, or school staff. Maybe a child is attending a preschool in our district, and there might be a school staff working with them that sees something that is concerning, and they can refer a child. And so when we talk about that, though, you have to, there has to be permission given by you always as the parent to allow us to assess. So even if a staff says, hey, can we talk about this kid? That might be considered the referral, but we're always going to go back to get your permission. And we do that through an assessment plan. So
can I jump in real quick? I'm sorry,
yeah.
Ginger, because I want to share that lens too, that districts are bound by child find, right?
Yeah.
So that means we're charged with, if there is a suspected disability, that staff is supposed to speak up, right? And discuss that with parents and school, other school staff that are appropriate.
Yep. And also too, just to, I mean, just because a teacher calls you and says, hey, I have a concern, does not mean that we're thinking your child needs an evaluation. It could just be, it could be anything. We like to start earlier and work with parents, like create a cohesive team. So maybe if there's things that we're doing at school that could be done at home, or vice versa, if there's things that work at home that we can do at school, even better, right? So someone has said, hey, heads up, can we talk about this kid, the referral? As a district, we have to respond. If you are a parent who says, I would like my kid assessed for special education, we have to respond to that within 15 days, all right? And our response is going to be one of two things. It's going to be an assessment plan that we offer you, which identifies all the different areas that we're going to do an assessment in and why we're doing the assessment. Or if the district responds and says, like some things are going on here, I don't think an assessment's right, we have to give that to you in writing as well, okay, in explaining the decision. So we're either going to respond with an assessment plan or something called a prior written notice. But so let's just say that we said, yep, let's do an assessment. From the day the assessment plan gets signed, we have 60 days to complete that assessment. And so when we do an assessment, we're gonna talk to you a lot. I know as a school psychologist, I bugged the parents all the time of the kids I was working with. I always had follow-up questions, but we are going to look at all the areas that we suspect a student might have a disability in. And I think maybe just pausing there too. So, and I don't think a lot of parents, well, I shouldn't say that. There are some parents I've worked with that didn't understand that when they did a referral for special education, when we say a student qualifies for special education, we're saying there is a disability, right? And some parents that I've worked with, they're like, whoa, 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 like that's not what I was looking for. I just wanted some extra help for my kiddo. And, and then we can have that discussion of what that would look like. But when we're looking at that, and I think this is later on in the presentation where we go over different categories, but I know that has taken some parents off guard. And so just know that if that's something that if you ask for assessment, that's what we're looking for. All right.
Mhm.
You want to add anything, Leon?
And I just was gonna say too, one of the questions I get so often from families is, well, who do I even talk to? Like maybe the parent's the one with
Yeah,
concerns, or maybe the doctor, right?
right.
Suggested,
Yeah.
like, I've got some developmental concerns, talk to your school about it. And parents are like, well, I talked to the teacher, but they didn't really see us concerned, so nothing really happened.
Um,
So I just want to, give families that concrete what
yes,
to do, right? So
right.
what would you recommend families do if they have a concern to make sure they're starting that ball rolling?
Gotcha. So, if it was me, I would contact the school psychologist at the school site and talk with them. Um, you could contact the school psychologist or the site administration at your school site. And most times, if you talk to a teacher, that teacher will come to the school psychologist or administration and let us know, but that doesn't happen all the time.
Mhm,
So if you want to make sure you're kind of getting there the right way, talk to your school psychologist, talk to your site administration, because they're going to understand more what to do with that request than potentially a teacher would who's never been trained in that.
mhm,
But also, I think it's also really good. So there's the discussion that could happen, but if you know, like, look, this is what I want to request, right? I would submit that in writing and make sure that you sign it and have a date on there. And because that starts our timeline to say, oh, we need to respond within 15 days of getting this request. And you could email that, send it to however you want to do it to your school psychologist or to your site administration. I think either one of those people are going to understand what you're asking for
mhm.
and start the process.
I appreciate you saying that because I think too, sometimes families get confused. I know families get confused over, um, sometimes if they express, gosh, I'm concerned about my kiddo, and the team might offer, well, let's have a student study team meeting first,
Yeah.
right? And some families, that may be okay with them. That may be what they want. Because, like you said, not everybody wants to necessarily jump straight to a special education assessment, right? Some families are just looking for, hey, is there some sort of struggle, some sort of natural supports we could put in for
Mhm.
my child? That being said, I agree with you that if you know that this is what you want, then you're absolutely right. Then put in writing and get that ball rolling. But
Yeah.
it again, you're the parent, right? Your
Right.
viewpoint matters and how you want to go down this path. You've got some, control and decisions.
And so just to kind of follow up on that, and we can stay here. You don't have to go back.
Okay.
Um, I, if I received that letter, one of the things I would always ask the parent is, let's come in and have a meeting. And it might be a student study team meeting. It might be just a sit down type meeting, but hopefully we've been talking before that. So I know your student, we've talked before, we kind of know what the concerns are, but let's say we haven't. I'm going to want to sit down and find out, tell me about your concerns, tell me about your child, right? Because I want to make sure that when we assess that we're assessing everything that is a concern so we don't leave something off. So we're definitely going to want your input on that, the teacher's input as well. So and how do I request my initial assessment? So contacting, yeah, your speech therapist, school psychologist at your homeschool site, right? We just talked about that. Um, and I think this is a really good point. Let them know you are requesting an assessment for special education eligibility. Sometimes, like you said, Leanne, if a parent calls and it's like, well, I just have some concerns, that doesn't necessarily make me go, oh, you're requesting a special education assessment. So being clear with that is super helpful. And always, Leanne, is super helpful with, she's helpful to me, a resource to me and to lots of other people and our parents about just navigating that whole process, because I'll be honest with you, like it can get complicated, right? And all of the acronyms and the language that comes with it, you know, all that stuff. So yeah,
Right.
at any point in time, you know, I encourage parents to like say that in English, you know, like what did you just say? Or, you
Right.
know, and so keep us on our toes. Like
Yes. And thank you, Ginger, for saying that, because you're right. It really is a partnership. And
Mhm,
even at that very first step of requesting an assessment, you know, I try and help families understand, well, what is your concerns?
mhm,
And and it sounds easy enough, right? But
mhm.
you really do have to sort of gather your thoughts and put it in that request, right? So
Yeah,
that the team really understands the scope of what your concerns are. I
right.
talk to many families who might just say, well, I just have a concern about speech. Okay, and well, tell me a little more. And once you start, getting a little deeper, you might find out that, oh, that might be a bigger assessment than we were
Right.
thinking. But so yeah, it's a lot to navigate, but you can do it. We're here for you.
Yep. Yep.
All right, you already talked about the 15-day
Yep.
timeline. Let's talk about the 60-day.
Okay. So once an assessment plan is signed and that's agreed upon, like I said, we have 60 days to complete that assessment. Um, so any break of 5 days or more, that timeline stops. So in Clovis Unified, we have a break at Thanksgiving that is all week of 5 days. So our timeline stops for that. Wait, yes.
Mhm.
Yes, our timeline stops for that. Had to think a minute. Um, at our winter break, our timeline stops. At spring break, our timeline would stop. So that's a little pause there. But most of the time we're gonna have that wrapped up in the 60-day timeline. So because our breaks don't happen that often, so it usually doesn't interfere. Um, so that's what you can expect from your IEP team at your school.
And that's so important to remember, because again, there's so much information sort of out there, which is great, but all it takes is one person sort of pointing a family in the wrong direction. Like, for instance, not acknowledging that, oh, well, school districts do get that pause over breaks. And a family can get very upset saying, well, we've been 60 days, now you're violating my rights.
Right.
But right, that's why it's important to understand what your parent rights are, and to make sure you're getting information from knowledgeable sources, because it really can so break trust
Yeah.
and set a wrong tone, and rightly so, if you think, something isn't being done right. And I will be the first one, I'm sure Ginger will too. Things do go wrong, right?
Absolutely.
And that's why it's important, though, that everyone collaborate and be aware of what the rules are.
Absolutely. So different systems have their own eligibility requirements. And so for school districts, we determine the need for special education services. We don't provide a diagnosis. So what that looks like is so a student, for example, and we're going to go over into all the things in a minute, but a student who has really significant attention problems. There is a category in special education called other health impairment, and a student who has significant attention problems can qualify under that. It does not require a diagnosis of like ADHD, something like that. I don't diagnose anything. I have these 13 eligibility areas under the federal law that I look at. So other systems that use different classification systems in California might be like is noted here, our regional centers are medical. So in the kind of the mental health world, they work with something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which, outlines like what is depression, what is anxiety, all of those types of things. The confusing thing is that sometimes education and those other systems use the same terms, but we might have slightly different definitions. So when we are talking about school, we are talking just about special education eligibility. So if you go to your doctor and your doctor says, oh, they have this, they qualify for special education services, that's not true. We have to do our own evaluation. To see if they would qualify for services. Because again, if you go back to that diagnosis of ADHD, I've met lots of kids in my career that have had that diagnosis who definitely do not need special education services. But some do. And so we go based on the need, like what they might have a diagnosis, but what's their need? How impacting is their diagnosis to their school day and their learning? So again, it can get very confusing and very overwhelming. But I just would encourage you ask all those questions. I so loved my relationship with parents at my school sites when they were like, Ginger, tell me about this, or my doctor said this, and then sometimes I would ask, hey, can I talk to your doctor? So if they're seeing something that I'm not seeing, can we get a release of information signed? Because I would love to talk to them about how they're seeing things. And just having that open communication between everybody working with your child is so helpful in planning and developing the IEP as we go forward. So if we ever ask for a release of information, it's not to, dig into your personal business or try and, I don't know, step over boundaries. It really is because we want to make sure that we're getting the complete picture so we don't miss something when we develop the IEP.
Ginger, I'm going to use another example. One of the most common disabilities in California right now is autism, right? And
Yeah.
so I talk to families often who one either think that because their child qualified for an IEP under autism, that meant they have a diagnosis of autism, right?
Right.
Um, it I also talk to families who maybe they have that medical diagnosis of autism, but then they're frustrated. Well, why didn't they qualify for an IEP for autism?
Right.
And so again, I think it's just so important for parents' knowledge, but also for that understanding again to not have this you know, feeling that, oh gosh, there's this wall up. But really what it is, as you said, everybody has their own, assessments that they
Yeah.
have to do. Regional center, I cannot tell you how many families I talk to, and it just breaks my heart that, they've gone through all the school assessment and they're like, okay, we've got our IEP, we're done. And
Mhm.
then, they think, and then someone mentions regional center to them, and it's like, but that's a whole nother assessment to determine if
Yeah.
you're eligible for that. Or like I put in the slide, public benefits,
Um,
SSI, IHSS, these are, they all have their own criteria. That being said, they often intermingle in the
yeah.
sense of if
Uh-huh.
you're going for a regional center assessment, by all means, you're going to take that IEP, right?
Right.
And give them that, and vice versa.
Mhm.
If you're applying for IHSS, you're going to want to let them know that your child has an IEP. But again, what I just wanted families to understand though is that one doesn't automatically qualify you for
Right.
another. And that's what's so hard to remember. But again, remember, you can reach out for help. So
Absolutely.
don't feel like you're doing this alone.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So we talked about categories of eligibility. I mentioned that a minute ago. So um, So like we were talking about those different classification systems, I had mentioned the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, right? That outlines all different kinds of mental health disorders in it. And if you ever get one of those books, it's about this thick, right? It's huge. But for special education, we just have 13 categories here. And why your input as parent is so important when we are doing the assessment is because maybe I might be just thinking, oh, it's a math issue, right? Because I've talked to the teacher and, there's just math. Then that's all the teacher sees. But you as a parent might say, I'm doing their math with them at night and they cannot sustain attention. Like it is so hard that they're distracted internally, those types of things. Then that's going to raise my kind of antennas up and go, huh, all right, we need to look at how your child is paying attention. And I need to do very specific observations to look at that and specific rating scales and certain types of tests. So that's why, your input is so important, or vice versa. The teacher might say, we're struggling, to pay attention, and mom and dad are saying, huh, we don't see that, right? And so it helps us just all when we're all talking for us to better understand what categories of eligibility do we need to investigate and assess for. So those are the 13 that we have in the state of California, or actually federally, not just in the state.
Well, and as you mentioned too, Ginger, it's important because, parents being the expert on their kiddo, right? That it's important to let the team know what all your concerns are and to hear what their concerns are, because between all of that expertise of all the team members, you want to make sure that the right people are involved in that, right? So, yeah, great advice.
And so one of the coolest things, just backing up to the other slide real quick, what I love about special education, because when we're assessing, kids, right? They're little, they're still developing. And so we might see something when they are 6 years old, but then they're hopefully going to look really different when they're 12 years old, right? Or 9 years old. And so what I love about special education is we serve the need, not the name. So let's say your child qualifies under speech and language impairment. But we're seeing that, we've got some social skills difficulties going on too, right? Along with the speech and language impairment, it looks like because of that language, we're not making friends as easily or understanding information. We can then, maybe we're tacking on a social goal on top of the speech and language goals, and maybe we're going to provide some service with how to develop friends. We're going to do some direct instruction in that. And so just always remember, I like to tell the families that I work with, I'm going to do my best to get that category of eligibility right. That's really important. But at the end of the day, we're going to go through and say, here's all the needs we identified. And then we're going to write that IEP based, we base the services your child's going to get on the needs they present, not so much how they qualify for special education.
Right. That qualification is just opening that door.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we're going to do our best to get it right though. So,
right. True, true. All right.
Okay. Medical diagnosis, we talked about this, does not automatically qualify a student. So we also don't require it. So if we do our assessment and we find, first that they meet that criteria, but they also need special education, they are going to get the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've already kind of talked about this, but it gets confusing.
It does. All right. So I promised you a quiz, and so now here we go. Let's see here. Nope, that's the wrong button. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So let me close that. we're gonna try again. Hmm, well, I'm sorry. This is my first.
That's all right.
I'm, hold on. Well, I keep closing that. But now how do I get to the next one? Well, I can't figure it out. So, oh, yes, I did. I figured it out. Okay, there we go. We're gonna do a knowledge check.
Okay, there it is.
So if you feel led, go ahead and we'll go ahead. We can read these together too. And so as soon as I put on my glasses, friends, there we go. Now I can read. All right. Only a child with a diagnosed disability can qualify for an IEP. And we just discussed that. That is false. All right. I already see people answering that. Great. If I request an assessment to determine eligibility for special education services for my child, the district has 15 days to respond with either an assessment plan or a prior written notice. That is true. My goodness, so far everyone's getting 100%. If my child qualifies for an IEP, they'll automatically qualify for other community-based services, such as Regional Center, SSI. That is false. Again, everybody's got 100%. Accommodations designed to provide a student with equal access and do not fundamentally alter standards or expectations. And that is true. And just so you know, everybody who took it got 100%. Yep. All right. Oh, hold on. Some, um, yeah. Well, okay, we had a little bit of confusion on the if my child qualifies for an IEP, they'll automatically qualify for other services. But that's okay. I think we covered that. And so good job, everyone. Well, that was fun. Thank you for your patience with me navigating that. All right. Now, IEP meetings. Here
Oh,
we go. So common reasons for an IEP meeting. Initial, we talked about that. So that would be the very first one to see if they
so
qualify. Oh, go ahead, Ginger.
on our screen, it still just says knowledge.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wonder why. Hold on. Hmm. Thank you for bringing that up.
Oh,
Okay, so I'm sharing. Is it there now?
no, it just still says knowledge.
Okay, so hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Hold on. Make sure the poll is closed. Did that do anything?
No, it's
Okay. Yeah, all right. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing
okay.
just for a moment. Okay, so the PowerPoint is gone, correct?
Nope, still there.
Well, let me try again. Your screen share, okay, stop share.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay, all right, so now we're gonna do it again, share. Now, does it say common reasons for an
Yeah.
IEP?
Yep. Now we're there.
Yay! Okay. Um, Common reasons for an IEP. Okay, so we have initial. So that again, that's the very first time a child's assessed, and that's gonna, be determine eligibility.
Yep.
Develop present levels and the annual. So this is required every year. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. That does not mean that that's the only time you can meet. It just means that is every year districts are required to hold an annual IEP.
Mhm.
Triennial means, so they're going to be reassessed again. All those assessments they did the initial. Now I say all, it depends. Right, Ginger?
Yes.
Their needs could change. They're
Yeah.
changing all the time. So maybe a kiddo might have needed to be assessed in an area that they no longer need to be, or vice versa. Maybe they've identified a new area that they need to include in on that assessment.
Yep.
Um, Then transition planning is required by age 16. And then you've got your 30-day review. So that's when a kiddo comes to a new district, and either that could be next door, right? The district next door, or from another state. But they've come to a new district. The IEP team has places them, it's called an interim placement, in a placement that is most similar based on what they were getting in their old district. Okay? Because everybody does things a little bit differently. Then within that 30 days, the team is going to meet and discuss, is this the appropriate placement, or do we need to look at something else, or maybe new assessments? Anything to add, Ginger? Or
All good. Oh, maybe just adding that every district kind of calls their program something different. And that also adds a level of confusion to all of this. So for our kiddos, for example, who are at preschool age and identify as autistic, and the team determines there's some certain needs that this child meets, we have a preschool autism program, and we call it PALS. But not every district has a PALS program. And so if you ever, go to a different district and maybe you had a child in PALS and you maybe say, where's their PALS program? They should have something similar, but they may not call it that. So
right. Well, and two, rural districts, right, can have very different services, than maybe a larger district. Um, don't even get me started on trying to navigate what's what staff titles are like, right? Every district calls their staff something different. And I know even myself, as I'm helping families navigate in and out of the district at times, I'm looking at other districts' websites going, what do they call a program specialist? Because in Clovis Unified, that is our, special education professional that oversees all the programs at that site. Well, in Fresno Unified, they call that a RIM. Every district has different titles, and so yeah, it can be very confusing for families. So back to IEPs. Another reason for an IEP could be a manifestation determination meeting. That's when, a kiddo unfortunately might be up for expulsion due to an ed code violation or a suspension for more than 10 days, like for those serious offenses. And a manifestation determination meeting is held where the IEP team as a whole determines, was there a relationship between the student's disability and the behavior that caused that disciplinary action. Um, another another thing that families will sometimes get frustrated about is, well, my child has a disability, they can't be disciplined, right? And that's, obviously not the case. Now I mean, of course, everything has its own set of, rules and boundaries, but um, often families are surprised that an ed code violation is an ed code violation, right? But again, that's where there are steps that are taken, and procedures that are to protect children with disabilities as well. An IEP amendment. And so you might have heard that term if your child already has an IEP. That's if any change needs to be made to the IEP, an amendment meeting can be held to address that change. Teams can opt not to meet. And I mean that parents often will say, I don't need to meet with 10 people about this. Like, I agree. Let's add on 20 more minutes of speech.
Mhm.
I'll sign it. And so again, you're a member of that team. Maybe you do want that full IEP team there to discuss it. That is your right as well. Here's my little thumbtack. Parents can request to have an IEP meeting at any time. Keep in mind though, and I said it's very important because I talk to families that Oh my goodness. They're like, well, I'm waiting for the annual to come up in 4 months so I can talk to the team about some challenges my kiddo is having. I was like, you don't have to wait 4 months. You're a member of that IEP team. You can request an IEP meeting. Um, but it's important to remember to keep in mind that the district has 30 days to get that scheduled. Okay. So if it's been a couple weeks, don't they're still within their timeline, okay? But it can be hard to get, especially with large teams, it can be hard to get everybody scheduled together. So who is the IEP team? Again, it's the parent or guardian, general education teacher, special education teacher, the LEA rep, um, an individual who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation. I'm going to call that the psychologist. What do you think, Ginger?
Um, that is going to be whoever assessed the student. So if a speech and language pathologist assessed, they need to be there to interpret their results for you. Psychologist, nurse, occupate, whoever was doing that assessment needs to be there.
Perfect. And at the discretion of the parent or agency, other individuals. So in other words, you can invite people that you feel are relevant to that IEP meeting to be a part of it. I often talk to families, who maybe they want their service coordinator to be there. I encourage them, and I put down here on important, remember though that like if you want your regional center service coordinator to be there, make sure you give them plenty of notice. As soon as you get that meeting date and time, let them know, okay? Other families, they might want their ABA agency to be there or other service providers. That is your right to invite them. It's also required that if an IEP team member will not be in attendance, um, that parents are notified ahead of time and that they're gonna be asked to sign an excusal for that member. For instance, let's say, the nurse can't attend for whatever reason. If you feel that that person is vital to that team discussion, then you have the right to request that it be rescheduled for a time when everyone will be. Again, though, if you are like, no, my kid doesn't really have any health issues, it's okay, then you are welcome to sign that. But just know that that is your right to have everyone there. IEP agenda. So again, this is just, I have seen it done with agendas and without. I kind of prefer them because I think it's nice just to know the order of how things are going to go. But in general, whether there's a formal agenda or not, you're going to have the welcome and introductions of every team member, the purpose of the meeting. You're going to be asked to sign in for attendance. That is not agreeing to the IEP. I know so many families think, have that in their head. Don't sign anything at the meeting, which we'll get to. That is your right. But all you're doing is signing in attendance, okay? When you first get there. And then of course they're going to give you your parent rights, those procedural safeguards. So they're going to go over the assessment report review, as Ginger mentioned, depending on the needs of your kiddo and, who is on that multidisciplinary team. It could be the nurse, a school psychologist, a special education teacher, related service providers. Again, if your child wasn't assessed for speech, or if they don't have speech on their current IEP, then I wouldn't anticipate a speech therapist being there, right? So this is unique to your child, and what the concerns were and who's going to be there. Continuing, so parent input on present levels. As Ginger has mentioned several times, your input matters. Your input is valuable. You are with that kiddo, more than anyone, and they are your everything. You are the expert on them, and so it's very important that you provide that input on what your concerns are and what their strengths are. They're going to ask you all of that. Then they're going to go over program recommendations, accommodations, plans to facilitate transition, if that's appropriate. On one of the former screens, we talked about transition. There's the transition plan at age 16 or by actually. I actually think it's now age 15. They're lowering the age of when uh, schools are supposed to start discussing that. But that's not the only transition. Transition can be, let's say, from kindergarten to first grade, right? That might be a half day to a full day, depending on the site. It could be from one program to another. Let's say your kiddo, for an example, maybe they were in a certain type of special day class and they're going to transition to another type. That's the transition. You're going to want to make sure, right, that both teams, the sending and the receiving, everybody's, got a game plan. It could be a different site. Children often will move from one school site to another if uh, I know in Clovis Unified, they're trying very hard to build continuums, meaning having the same program from kinder to sixth grade available at one school site. But not every site has all different options. And so kiddos often do have to move from one school site to another. If that's going to happen, as a parent, I would want a transition plan. I'd want to meet that receiving team. I would want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with what that's going to look like. All right, Ginger, so you're on IEP components.
Right. Okay, so I hope you guys don't get overloaded, but if you have any questions following tonight, please reach out, call me, email me, whatever you want. I'm happy to answer questions. So what is the purpose of an IEP? The purpose is we are trying to develop an academic program for a child who's been identified as having a disability per special education code that will help them learn, in an appropriate manner. So we're looking at small steps towards a larger goal. So we're at, we talked about an annual goal. We'll hold, that meeting. And we'll say, okay, a year from now, where would we like to see your child in whatever area that is? And then we will break that down into smaller goals. And then we're going to tell you what we're going to do to help them meet that goal. You should know who's going to be working with your child, how often they're going to see your child, and how long they're going to see your child. What they will do may not be as specific because that's going to be more teacher discretion. So let's say they're going and they're working with a resource specialist teacher. Let's say I always use math because I hate math and I'm terrible at it. But if I was going to my resource specialist teacher who's a special education teacher and working on a math goal, let's say, that day we might do something different because that teacher has said, let's try doing math with manipulatives today instead of this. So that teacher is going to use their training to help your child meet that goal. But you should know who they're meeting with, for how long, where, how often, all of those things. And when we're talking about, so how do we get there? How do we get start to finish, right? So you can see down here where it says, remember, our assessments are the base. So they're kind of the plate of everything. They're going to hold it all. They're going to set that foundation for where the child is currently performing. And then we're going to identify the child's needs through our present levels, IEPs. So we often say that our assessments identify our needs, right? And we're going to identify those through present levels in the IEP. And it's our needs that then drive our IEP goals. So if we identify in the needs, hey, there's a math need, there's a reading need, and there's a on task, like student has a hard time. So you should see goals written in all of those areas because we've identified there's a need in those areas. And then it's our goals then that tell us, well, how do we serve that, right? How do we meet those goals? So then we're going to say, we think your child needs this amount of service, whatever that is. And then depending on that service, then that kind of drives where education happens. Now we said education's not a place, right? Education is a service, but we know there are some kids that really never want to leave the general education classroom. So that IEP service might come into the general education classroom, right? We might have someone come in there and work with the child in there. We have some kids that might be so distracted by that, that would never work. And so we might pull them out of the general education classroom, work with them in a smaller setting, or some kids who need all day support to really meet those IEP goals in a separate setting outside the general education classroom. So it really depends on what your child needs. So the service is built for your child rather than your child built for the service, if that makes sense. So it's all very individualized. So IEP components. So this is a legal contract between the school district and the parent. So that's why it's really important, like Leanne said, if you sign an attendance, you're not signing an agreement. I encourage parents, take it home, review it, really kind of understand what we're going to be doing. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, how does my kid qualify, right? What did all these assessments say about whether or not they qualify? And there's going to be a statement on the first page that says, does the student have a disability? And we're going to say yes or no, and we're going to explain that in that. So that's the first thing to look for. The transition plan, we've talked about that. If a student's 16 years or older, or like Leanne said, if you're going from this to that, right? I remember doing this for a kindergarten student who obviously not 16 years old, but they were going from a general education classroom to a more to a SDC classroom. And he would go to the SDC classroom for about a week in the morning, come back to his general education classroom for a little in the afternoon, because we wanted him to be able to kind of break away slowly from the friends that he had made. We wanted him to be able to say goodbye, right? And feel good about that. He actually loved his new school, so we did it for a day, and then he was like, I don't want to go back there anymore. So that was good. And our present levels of performance. So this is where we're going to break down in different domains, and those are all listed right there, how we see your child performing. And so you should be part of that discussion, right? So as a school psychologist, I would call the parents and I would say, we're doing this assessment. Maybe you filled out a rating scale, but talk to me what that looks like at home, right? How do you see this playing out? And that will get put into our present levels of performance. It's not just test scores, it's the totality, right? It's the observations, the interviews, the rating scales, all of those things go into our present levels. Special factors. So if a student has a hearing or visual impairment or some type of language impairment that they might need a device for, that goes here. We're going to talk about how we're going to meet that need. Also, if a student has behavior problems that are interfering with their learning, we need to say yes or no to that. And if we say yes, we need to say how we're going to deal with that. Because you as a parent need to know, what is that going to look like, right? How are we going to intervene? And then for statewide assessments, there's a whole page that talks about that you're going to see, that's going to say, yes, they're going to take either what type of state assessment are they going to take, because there's a couple different kinds. And then what accommodations are we going to put into place? So if we know a student has difficulty with reading, let's say, and we're doing math and there's word problems, we can read the word problems to them, right? We're not assessing reading in that moment, we're assessing math. So we can read those word problems. So those type of things will be built into our state assessment page. And then goals, we've talked about that. we will set those annual goals. But let's say a kid maybe all of a sudden just picks up and takes off on that goal, right? And they've only worked on it for 3 or 4 months, but they've met that goal. We will more than likely, your case manager, whoever is taking care of your kiddo at school, will come to you and say, hey, we need to create another goal because they met this goal. So we have to update it every year, but you're going to get progress reporting just like at the same time that report cards come out. And it might be with that we did some progress monitoring and we're like, oh, we met this goal and we have to create a new one. So,
or vice versa, right?
vice versa.
It
Yeah.
could be, oh, wow, that, we overshot a little bit. We may need
Right.
to scaffold this back down a little bit.
Right.
Mhm.
And then if I am a mom, but if I'm in that situation, I'm going to say, hey, that might be, let's call a meeting. Let's talk about this. Why didn't they make that progress? What's happening? Right. And let's talk about that. And then from there, we're going to talk, there's going to be a page called services. And this is where we're going to outline in there all the things we're going to do. Back to who's working with my child, when are they working with my child, for how long are they working with my child, and what are you going to work on? So that's all outlined in that page. Then there's another page called educational setting, where this goes over a couple of questions where we talk about here's all the different educational settings that we have, all the different, not settings, but services that we have considered. And based on our evaluation as a team, what do we feel like is most appropriate for the student? And then part of that discussion is we're going to talk about, are there potential harmful effects? And that's part of this page as well, where we go over and we say, what potentially is the drawback of this? And do the benefits outweigh that drawback? And so that's part of that discussion as well. And if there are potential harmful effects, what could we do to minimize that for that child? And you're going to know how much time they're out of the general education setting versus in the general education setting. We're always looking to be in the general education setting as much as possible, as is good for that student. This is my least favorite page in the IEP, but the emergency plan. This came around after COVID, where we had to, potentially, right? It's happened once. I hope it never happens again. But if for some reason school shuts down and we're out of school for more than 10 days, we need to come up with a plan so that we can continue to provide that educational service, so we don't have loss of learning, significant loss of learning. And then the last thing we would ask is to have your consent. And so again, that doesn't mean you have to consent in that meeting. I would take that home, I would look it over, and once you feel really comfortable with that, and then if you have questions, you're like, hey, I need to meet again because I'm not sure about this. That's great. I would rather questions be answered than a parent feel in the dark or unsure about something.
Right. And Ginger, one of the things that families wonder a lot is, well, what if I agree with some of it, but I don't agree with all of it? What does that look like?
So that has happened where, for instance, let's say I've done an evaluation and I have determined after assessment that a student qualifies as having a learning disability. And the parent says, but they have a diagnosis of autism, right? I feel like, and so, but they love the services, they love the goals, they think, all of that's great. And they want their kid to start getting that. They feel like it might be more autism than this. Then there's a box they can check that says, I agree with everything besides this. Or I agree with everything besides these things, right? And then we'll meet as a team and we'll try and figure out how we can address that. and come up with a solution.
But so signing what you are in agreement with, though, will
Yes.
allow that portion
Yes.
to get started because they cannot implement anything
Right.
that they don't have a signature and agreement to.
Right.
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 Okay. Got it. All right. I promised you we were going to talk about LRE. Here you go.
All right, so least restrictive environment. So basically, if you think of the way I conceptualize this, think about going to the doctor, right? I would hope that if I go to the doctor and I have a stomach ache, and they're not going to say, okay, let's schedule you for surgery tomorrow, right? They are going to go through the process of what's the problem, and they're going to find the least restrictive things to do to try and fix that problem. And as they go through those things, it might wind up in surgery, or it might just be an antibiotic that I need, right? So similarly with special education, we are going to try, I mean, I'm going to say this, but I don't mean it badly. We're going to try to do the least restrictive things with your child. We're going to try and so that they can be in, that's the main thing we're looking for is independence, right? We're hoping that when every kid graduates, they are at, doing what they can do to their full potential and doing it as independent as they can. So you can see all the way to the left is a general education classroom. So that's what every student gets. And we say that all students are considered general education students first, right? Meaning that all of our kids get general education services. Okay. The next thing we would look at is a special education classroom. So kind of backing up to general education classroom. There are some students who might receive an hour of service a week to work on reading. So that would be maybe they go to a special education classroom an hour a week, or that service pushes into their general education classroom to work on that reading. So again, just goes based on the need of the student. The next thing we would look at is a classroom that is a special education classroom. So this is where a student might not be able to access the general education curriculum, and I need to just really focus on those IEP goals because that's going to benefit me. That's what I need. And then, but also, just because I'm in one of those classrooms does not mean that I'm not going to spend time in general education. So we're constantly looking at how can we increase that time in general education? What does the student need? So maybe they need that special education classroom for academic instruction, but they really benefit from the social time that they get in the general education environment. So we're going to look for every opportunity we can to get them in the general education environment to get all those really good social opportunities. And then some students actually need more of a specialized school. And so there are those in our area and around our state and our country that we can, the student can access if that's what their needs are. And that is a school that is just for special education students. And then we have a homebound, is that like home hospital? Is that what you're thinking there, Leanne?
Correct.
So a home hospital setting where, not home hospital, but they are receiving instruction at home. So maybe they have some type of illness or something's going on with them that it's just hard to come to school. So they can get support through a special education teacher, and that's all outlined in your IEP if that ever happens, outlining how often they will get that, what work they will be given. And it's very detailed for how long we're going to do that. And then the most restrictive is what we call hospital or residential facility. So there are some kids who maybe their behaviors are just very dangerous and very concerning. So we need to have them in a very controlled, like this, the student, the family, the school together. We say we need a lot of structure. The student needs a lot of structure, a lot of support, not just during the school day, but during the school day, after school hours, lot of support kind of around the clock. So it can extend to a residential facility. That's rare, very rare, but it does happen at times. So, yeah.
Ginger, I was going to jump in. One of the things that I think is so important for families to remember is that um, the law dictates that all children have access to general education
Yes.
unless deemed otherwise,
Yes.
right? And that's why,
That's their starting point.
right, as a starting point, right? Until the districts are held accountable,
Mhm.
right? That if you're gonna say a kiddo is not gonna be with their gen ed peers for their
Mhm.
education, if you're pulling them out of that, you have to justify that.
Absolutely.
Right? There has to be that proof that this is what that child needs.
Right.
Um, and so I think that's important to remember. The other thing to remember is I often speak with families who compare. They'll say, well, Bobby Joe over there has the same diagnosis as my kiddo. How come they're in a special day class and my child can't be? Right?
Mhm.
Because again, I am here to tell you, I talk to just as many families who want their child, in gen ed as I do families who don't want their child in gen ed. And I think that's all important, right? Like what you view for your child is all part of that team, right?
Right.
And that input decision. Um, but it's important to remember that, like you mentioned earlier, diagnosis, all of that is individual to each child. So
Mhm.
two kiddos with, even a very similar profile, right? They might learn in very different settings. One kiddo might be completely overwhelmed, like you said, in that gen ed setting and not able to access learning. But boy, do they just really thrive off that social interaction. And vice versa. There are other kids who just that exposure, right?
Mhm.
That may really truly benefit them. But that's why it's so important that, these conversations be held, in the context of that IEP meeting,
Mhm.
and that it be based on that, individual child's needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, the signature page. I think we talked about this a
We
little
did.
bit.
We
Yes.
did.
Well,
So the
go ahead.
top, oh no, were you going to do this one?
No, no, it's you. I just was gonna say, I like to tell families to remember to use this to remind you who was there.
Oh,
You could always ask, but I know that it can be very confusing to remember who a person was and their title and how to access their contact information. I always say this is a great cheat sheet for you, but always feel free to reach out to the team. Reach out to the teacher and say, hey, could you email me the list of the names and titles and contacts of who's on my IEP team, so
yep.
I understand that. But go ahead.
The one thing that you'll see on there, so the top portion of this page is just the attendance page.
Mhm.
So this might get sent around at the beginning of the meeting before we've discussed anything, because we just want to notate who was here, right? Um, and so the one title on there that's like, what's an LEA participant? So that is, as Leanne talked about earlier, local education agency representative. So that's going to be someone who understands special education law, understands special education regulation, because we want to make sure that whatever happens in that IEP meeting, that we are compliant with the laws and with your due process rights and with your rights and your child's rights and those types of things. So sometimes in meetings, again, we're not perfect. And, there's a lot of pages here. So that LEA person, whoever that is, might catch something and be like, oh, we need to change this. Let's make sure that that has the right date, or it has this. And so this is a working copy. It is a draft at the meeting. You'll see draft stamped on that. Because we can make changes to it, right? At that point, like that's the time to catch those things. So if we are making those corrections in a meeting, that's a good thing. Because we want to make sure that our final, this is what we're offering you is clean. So top part is signatures, the middle part there is consent, and there's several boxes. And one is I agree to all the parts of the IEP. We talked about I agree to things except for, that's a box you can mark. There's I can't read them all, but as you are in that, again, in that IEP meeting with your team, you will have some options about what you want to consent to. And so that's, again, why I would encourage parents, take it home, look it over. Make sure that you are informed. If you have friends that, you're like, hey, come over here and look at this with me, whatever it is you need to do to feel comfortable. Then we want to make sure that you make an informed choice. And then where Leanne is circling, that is where you are
Parent
marking.
involvement.
Yes.
Mhm.
And the team is going to ask you, do you feel like you were involved in this meeting, in this process? And you can say yes or no. And I would encourage you to be honest with
Yeah.
that.
And then this is if they become eligible for Medi-Cal. Will you take just a minute and explain that? Because families often get confused about that.
Yes. So we do not know in our school system who is Medi-Cal eligible or not. But if you say, yeah, go ahead. So what happens is, let's say you were to go get this assessment outside of school at a private assessor. It's going to be thousands of dollars to get that done. It's a no cost in the school system. So the state of California allows for some reimbursement of that. And so we, again, don't know who's Medi-Cal eligible or not, but if you say, yeah, go ahead, I'm fine with that. We will submit their names. If your child has private insurance, we get nothing. But if they are Medi-Cal eligible, we will get some funding back from that. And then the last part of the consent page, just this might be marked ahead of time because, we just to be efficient. But we will make sure before you leave that meeting, you should have a copy of your procedural safeguards, a copy of all the reports. You're going to have a copy of the IEP, the finalized IEP. Or if there's corrections that need to be made, we might hand you that copy, with scratches on it and say, we'll send you a clean copy, but you should leave with an IEP. And I think that,
And then if they've received written notification of the protections when LEA requests access to Medi-Cal benefits.
oh, yes,
Mhm. But again, these are all outlined because they're important.
they are important.
Yeah, you have a right. It is legally required that you receive all of these, okay?
Yes.
So again, please make sure that you are signing what you agree with, okay? And what really happened, okay?
And so if those boxes are marked ahead of time and you did not get your parent rights or you did not get parent reports, ask them to uncheck that box.
Yes,
Didn't
ma'am.
happen.
Yes. All right. I know we're getting short on time, so I'm gonna go through this quickly, but preparing and partnering. So, as I've mentioned several times, you're the expert on your child, parents. But it is so important that you be prepared to share that knowledge. It is so easy. We know our kiddos so well, and we think, well, certainly I can come to a meeting and share my thoughts, right? But I will tell you, you are a much more effective partner if you've written down what are your questions ahead of time? What are your child's strengths? What are your areas of concern? And you don't have to write a novel, right? But if you just even have that basic, what you want to contribute at that meeting, because just like an important doctor's appointment, right? It's valuable time. You want to make sure that you are making informed decisions and that you are sharing an accurate picture of your child. I honestly, you don't want to walk out of there and say, "Oh, I wish I had, said this." But I want to give the disclaimer before we do all this is that remember that the IEP is a living, breathing document, as Ginger said. Okay, I I know full well that it can feel like, okay, this is that important moment. This is my one shot, right? This is what we went through all these assessments for, and this is where I'm going to get the results, and we're going to make all the decisions. Yes, that's true. It's also not true
Hmm.
because again, this this is a living, breathing document. Your child changes, their needs change, your concerns could change, right? Um, if in 3 months, like Ginger said, they're not making progress, you're seeing struggles. You come back to the table, you revisit all of this again. And so that's why as much as I say, I want you to be prepared, I want you you know, to feel like you're ready to contribute as the important team member you are. I also, I want you to keep in mind though that it's never a one and done, okay? Just a few tips. Again, besides writing down your thoughts, again, what are their preferences? We referenced that every child is unique, how your child learns and what motivates them, what benefits them. You know all that, right? You know what makes your kiddo tick. Be ready to share that. So, if your child already has an IEP, review that previous one, okay? So that if changes are proposed, again, when you go home, you can compare one to the other, and that will be very helpful. Use a binder for paperwork. So you might have noticed, and I'll get to it at the very end, but I, here with our early start families, I give every single family an IFSP binder because I'm trying to train them and equip them. It has it has a place for them to put their reports, to put their IFSP. It has a pencil pouch with a highlighter and a pen and a notepad because I really want families to get into that mindset of being ready to contribute. You do not have to be an expert, right? You don't need to be an attorney. But if you come to that meeting prepared, eh, I cannot tell you how much more effective that will make you as an IEP team member. Um, and again, even if you don't quite understand what everything means, if you've got it all in one place, right? And you just keep putting it there, you know that everything's in that tote bag. So when you go to a meeting, it's all there. It takes that pressure off you too. It really does, because you're like, I may not know exactly what this is, but I know I've got it here. Um, okay, this is another little pro tip. And again, depending on the need of your kiddo, but if it, especially if your child might have a little more extensive needs, it's really important to have that important information in one place so that if you aren't there, or even if you are, if you could grab that in an emergency, even more importantly, maybe they're being babysat at grandma and grandpa's, right? If something happened, you've got that important information in one place to take with you. Okay. So that's just a little caregiver tip. Okay. So getting ready, you have the right to ask the team for a draft copy of the IEP and assessment reports ahead of time. Okay, I'm going to give the disclaimer. They're not required to honor that, but I'm telling you, if you give them notice that that is your expectation, that you really want to, because it really is a disservice if you come to that meeting and everybody else there has seen those reports, right? Except for you, that makes it very hard to contribute to that IEP. Often I'll tell families, um, if that has happened and you felt like you again need to go home and really go over those things and call a part two, so then you can come back to the table having all that knowledge, you have the right to do that, okay? But I will tell you, most teams I have worked with will certainly try and honor that for you. Um, the meetings need to be scheduled for a day and time that's mutually agreeable. It's not just this is the date, take it or leave it, right? There need, and again, but I encourage families, try and be collaborative. I mean, I'm a part of many IEP meetings and I see how hard teams work to coordinate, 8 different people's schedules, right? And that's just for one IEP. They do dozens and dozens of these. And so, but try and be flexible, but at the same time, that does need to be agreeable for everyone. And I mentioned consider bringing someone with you that knows your child. It's an extra pair of ears too. You're getting so much information at those meetings, that it can be helpful to have someone process it with you. You have the right to auto record. You do have to give 24-hour prior notice to the team. But you absolutely have the right. And sometimes families will say, "Oh, I don't want to seem adversarial." It really isn't adversarial. I talk to many families who are not upset with anybody, but they just maybe dad couldn't come and they want to share that with him so they can sit there and listen to it together. And he could be a member of that team and hear what happened. It could be maybe that they just need time to process it and hear it again. Again, teams do this all day long, all week long. For us parents, this is our one IEP, right? That we're waiting for. And so it's a lot of information. Um, Things to think about. Again, feel free to ask questions if you don't understand something. There is nothing wrong with saying, could we hold on a minute? Can you repeat that? Can you tell me what that acronym means? I don't understand that. Carefully read through every page. This is a legal document that drives services for your child. Um, this is really important. Do the assessments capture an accurate picture of your child's, strengths and the concerns? If they don't, then talk to the team about it. Like, wait a second, that doesn't sound like my kid. Um, Review the notes page. Meeting notes are not legally mandated, okay? I know in Clovis Unified, we do take meeting notes, but review them and make sure it really reflects what was discussed. Um, and if you as a parent have the right to, submit your own written parent concerns as well. Remember that the IEP should pass the stranger test. So I want you to think about that. Sometimes I will work with families that maybe the teacher is like, we don't really need to put that in because I do that anyway with your kid. So it's totally fine, right? Okay, yay, but what if that teacher leaves tomorrow? And I can tell you it happens all the time, right? Life happens. And that IEP, again, is a legal document, and anybody who picks that up who has never met your child should be able to read through that and have a very clear picture of your child and what they need. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And as Ginger said, you do not have to sign the IEP at the meeting. Take it home, review it thoroughly, whatever you feel comfortable with. That being said, I talk to many families who are like, I don't want to take it home. I don't want homework. I agree with what they said. Where do I sign? That's okay too. No judgment. I just
Right.
want you to know what your rights are. Okay. So, real quickly, procedural safeguards. These are your parent rights. These are just the summary. You have the right to request an IEE. So that is if the team has done an assessment, let's say, for instance, the school psychologist has done all their assessments and you really strongly disagree. Like you've come back to the table, you guys have discussed it, and you just fundamentally don't agree with those assessments. You have the right to ask the district to pay for an independent evaluation. Now, again, this is just an overview. There are lots of different, rules, but it doesn't mean they always have to honor that. But you do have the right to request that, and they often will. So prior written notice, we talked about that. You're always required to get that with any of those um, decisions that, are made or steps that are going to be taken. Parental consent, access to your students' records, and information on how disputes will be resolved. So, all right, give yourself a hand. We made it this far. IEPs are not easy. They're not easy for parents. They're not easy for professionals. There are emotions. I often, when I talk to professionals, I'll share how hard it is as a parent to come into an IEP meeting where number one, you're talking about the most important thing in your entire life, your child, right? And you've got this whole team of people who are sharing their input. They know every single intimate detail about your family, and you know nothing about them other than their name and title, right? They know how you gave birth. They know everything about you and your child's medical, everything. And I'm going to tell you that is hard. That is hard um, to navigate as a parent. You know what? I talk to parents and I say, you know what? It is hard on professionals too. You are one parent, one family, and they are trying to individualize plans for dozens of students, right? Even just one teacher in one classroom. Think of every family in that classroom has their own needs, right? Some families want all this communication, some families don't want any communication. I mean, all these different things, right? That teams have to navigate. And emotions get involved. Honestly, it's hard. Even egos can complicate meetings. But, I often think about too, because like in my position, I kind of have a foot in both doors, right? And I think it's hard. Imagine, as a professional, if a parent's questioning every single thing you did and your motive behind it, right? That could be hard if you've really put your heart and soul into trying to serve this family. But vice versa, it can be hard on a parent when, man, you've tried so hard to work collaboratively with this team, and you feel like there's a wall and you're just being dismissed and your concerns aren't being, taken seriously. So I say all of that it's hard. It is not easy stuff navigating this. And so I commend everybody who has ever navigated an IEP meeting. Okay, good job. Real quick, I made this. This is what an IEP should not look like. Um, Honestly, like, and I feel like I've been all of these at any point, right, through the many years. But this is what it shouldn't feel like. It shouldn't be, team members, looking at their phones. You can tell they're impatient. They're just ready to get out of there. Um, the nervous parent who is like, oh my goodness, I'm up against this whole team. You are part of the team, mom, dad. Okay, remember that. Um, or this, it shouldn't be an us against them. If it feels like that, something's going wrong. Okay. Um, so partnering is power. Again, I cannot stress collaboration enough. Being an advocate for your child, which that's our role as parents, is to advocate for our children, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be adversarial and tear people to shreds. If you're a professional, that doesn't mean that you are the expert and the parent is not, right? It means being respectful of every person at that table and realizing that even if you don't agree, right, at least you have to have that foundation of being respectful, being kind, and being collaborative, that it is the student at the center of all of that, right? It's not about us adults, it's about working together to make sure that that kiddo gets what they need. What if you don't agree? Okay, so as we've gone through this, hour and a half presentation, you can see from the very first step of requesting an assessment, and what if the district gives you a prior written notice and says, no, thank you, we don't see a need to assess? Boom, there's an opportunity for disagreement, right? The entire IEP process is an opportunity to question, like, hey, is this right or not? So again, what if you don't agree with something? The first step, I always stress to families and to professionals, right? If gosh, they're not seeing eye to eye, communicate clearly. What is it that your concerns are and what you disagree with? That sounds very simple, but I cannot tell you how many times I will help a family do that. I'll listen to an hour and a half long conversation of what they're upset about, and then I help them focus that. Okay, so what I heard was three things that you're really upset about and that you disagree with. Okay, yes, there's other things going on, but what is it related to the IEP that you fundamentally disagree with and you want to work on? And have you shared that with the team? And sometimes so much other information, you know, gets shared out or gets discussed that maybe you haven't communicated what it is you really disagree with. So by all means, make sure that is done. Again, I would suggest maybe in an email. So there's that paper trail. So there's that, being able to reference it again. Like, no, I said that this is what I was concerned about. And two, it helped as a professional, right? I reference things like that. I think,
Mhm.
okay, what was mom upset about? And I can go back, okay, we addressed this, we addressed that. So again, it's not trying to be adversarial, it's really just trying to get that clear communication of what is it we disagree with and how do we get past this? Reach out to your program specialist. If you're not in Clovis Unified, and there's another term for that, there will be someone who oversees that special education program. If you don't know who that is, I would say call the principal and ask them, and they could put you in touch with them, or the teacher can, right? Continue with another IEP meeting to try and resolve it. If that still doesn't get you where you need to go, every district that I'm aware of has an ADR process. That's an alternative dispute resolution. And that's where um, you're trying to resolve it at the lowest level possible so you can resolve it and move on, right? Some families are like, nope, I want to go to court. That's your right as well, and there are procedural safeguards for that. But many families are like, I just want to get this solved and move on. And so again, I encourage families to find out what your district's process is. And remember, you can reach out. If you're in Clovis Unified, you can reach out to me at any time. If you are not in Clovis Unified, every area in California has access to family resource centers, family empowerment centers. If you don't know whose yours is, feel free to reach out to me and I will be happy. In Fresno County and actually the 12 surrounding counties, Exceptional Parents Unlimited, they are both a family resource center and a family empowerment center, parent training information. It all just depends on funding as to what the title is and what they do. But again, I can help you with that. Okay, that was a lot of information. We're almost done, I promise. That's our dog Cash. That's his look every day. But yep, it's a lot. And I don't want you to feel exhausted. I don't want you to feel like you had to memorize all of this. There are resources, and that's what I'm going to get to now. All right. On the Clovis Unified webpage, and even if you're not in Clovis Unified, guess what? This is all free. You can still access it. I have on here how to get to it. But once you're on the special education homepage, it's going to look like this over here. And you're going to see I've tried to organize it so it's pretty simple to understand. You've got parent resources, you've got professional learning. That's more for the professionals in the district. And then you've got policies and plans, all those, legal documents. But under parent resources, you're going to find information about the Family Resource Center, links to webinars and workshops like this. You're also going to find a page just on IEP resources. And I highly encourage you to check that out. Again, it's not a legal lens, it's all through a parent lens as to, what's important information to know to help navigate this. All right, my last little piece of advice is getting involved. Your school site, no matter, what program, what services your child gets, right? Their school site, that's their community. Get involved. We often hear about, inclusion and we want our kiddos included. I always say to families, what's the best way to get involved and make sure that, our kiddos with disabilities are included, right? Often, often families might be upset about, well, the carnival didn't have a booth that my child could access with their needs. Well, you know what? I really say get involved. Then get involved in your parent teacher club. Get involved with the carnival planning committee. Who better knows how to include children with disabilities than a parent, right? It is not rarely do I come across professionals that were trying to not include someone or didn't think, oh, maybe this setting would be hard for a child with a vision impairment to navigate, right? It's just not on their radar because they haven't walked that path. And so if you have that expertise because you live that life, right? Get involved and help educate others and help come up with ways to help include all kiddos. Better communication, relationship building with the teams, that benefits our kiddos, right? I have this little picture of the Community Advisory Committee. Every SELPA, that's Special Education Local Plan Area, every SELPA is mandated to have a Community Advisory Committee for special education. So again, if you're in Clovis Unified, this is the information on ours, but go to your district's page and I would type in Community Advisory Committee in the search bar and get that information if you are not in Clovis Unified. Or if you need to reach out to me, I'd be happy to help you find that. So, all right, questions. As we were going, I kept checking the question and answer. I didn't see any questions. So I'm going to assume we don't have any. That being said, Ginger and I both include our information, right, on the PowerPoint. So you've got our email addresses, you've got my phone number. Feel free to reach out. Please, again, remember to fill out your survey. Your feedback is so important to me. I really do read through it all. I really do use that input to help plan. And so, oh, hold on. Now we have a question. Um, what was the community for again? That was Community Advisory Committee for Special Education. Okay. And there is a page on the website just for that, and it will tell you all about what a community advisory committee is. It's an advisory, again, it's mandated to have, to where it's parents and professionals and community members, anyone with an interest in special education, getting together and having input and advising the SILPA on special education services in their area. Okay, but it's a great opportunity for families to get together with the professionals, typically the administrators in special education that oversee those programs. And again, in community members, I know for our community advisory committee in particular, we bring in community guests for every meeting to share out like what they have to offer. And so can I slide back so you can screenshot? Well, of course I can. Let me see here. Just remember though, too, it's going to be in the handout. You're going to get a copy of these slides. So that's why I didn't want anyone to feel like they have to memorize it, okay? Um, and again, when you log off, you'll see that link to the survey. In a couple days, you'll have an email from me personally, and it will have all these resources on it. Okay? Ginger, I just want to say thank you again. I know you are a busy, busy woman. You've had a very long day, and
We all have long days.
we do. Oh, yeah, it is true. But I know you and I both can attest that we love what we do, and
Absolutely.
we love serving families and kiddos, and so it doesn't feel like a job, right?
No, and thank you everybody who came, because I know you've probably had long days as well. So thank you so much.
That is so true. I'm always so impressed when a family, takes the time to come to something like this. Because I just think, man, to think that you would spend time to try and learn more when you already have so much on your plate. That,
Right.
yeah, that's why those surveys are important to me, because I want to make sure that your valuable time is being served well.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, have a great night, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.